Hello everyone. We're going through Ethernet 4 training on some of the common FAQs, the common frequently asked questions related to Ethernet 4 in terms of estimating, in terms of licensing, in terms of using in the field, as well as migration from AX to Ethernet 4. So we'll jump through this quickly. So question number 1. I had heard that Ethernet 4 Supervisor and ECBOS 8 have new capacity-based licensing models. Can you explain how they work? So the capacity-based licensing model for an Ethernet 4 Supervisor looks something like this. So the first step is you choose your Ethernet 4 Supervisor model based on the number of ECBOS connections. So that will determine whether you need to order an Ethernet 4 Supervisor 0, 1, 2, 3, 10, 100, or unlimited. Those numbers are corresponding to the number of ECBOS connections that you will need. Step 2 is you choose your specialized drivers. So these could be any database drivers, any third-party system drivers that are not included as standard drivers that are part of your Ethernet 4 Supervisor license, such as BACnet, LonWorks, Modbus, and so on, as you see below. Step 3 is you choose your device pack based on the number of IP-based devices or points. So there are two limits here that you need to be aware of. There's a device limit and there's a point limit, and we'll be getting into more details on that in upcoming FAQs. Step 4, you choose your software maintenance agreement. So the software maintenance agreement allows you to upgrade your version of Ethernet 4 as you go from major version to major version, so from 4.2 to 4.3 and so on. And so you can, it's a mandatory step where you need to purchase at least an 18-month SMA, but you can also opt for a 1, 3, and 5-year SMA as well. And we'll be going into more details concerning SMAs as well. Capacity-based licensing model for the ECBOS 8, very similar. First step, though, is you choose your ECBOS 8 hardware model based on whether you need Wi-Fi or not. So there's a factory-enabled Wi-Fi for US-based installations. There's factory-enabled Wi-Fi for all non-US installations. And there's factory-disabled Wi-Fi. This is a permanently disabled Wi-Fi, and it's not, you're not able to enable that in the field. Step 2 is, again, you choose your specialized drivers. So these are third-party system drivers that are not otherwise included with your ECBOS 8 license. Again, standard open drivers like BACnet, LonWorks, Modbus are included as standard. You don't need to order those separately. You then have to choose your ECBOS 8 software core based on the number of devices or points. So again, based on the number of controllers or devices that will be communicating to that ECBOS 8 through any one of these protocols, and likewise point limits in parallel. Finally, step 4, again, similar to the supervisor, you have to choose your software maintenance agreement, 18 months, 3 years, or 5 years. Question number 2, with the device point licensing, are they both hard limits? For example, an 8010 can support 10 devices or 500 points. Is there flexibility to exceed one of those limits? For example, 12 devices with 10 points each? So the ECBOS 8 device point license applies to whichever limit you reach first. So in the example above, 12 devices exceeds the 10 device limit. So even though you're only using 120 points total, which is well below the 500 point limit, you still pass the device limit, and thus you will need to purchase an additional device upgrade pack to accommodate for those additional devices. Question number 3, on licensing, will it still be possible to upgrade an existing license to a license with more capacity? For example, if a project is expanded during construction. So this is in the case where you already have purchased the license initially and you need to add more devices after the fact. So yes, there are upgrade packs for extending your device and point limit after the initial purchase. Question number 4, what are the differences between EC-Boss 8 device integration packs and device upgrade packs? So you'll notice in the Distech controls price list that you have two similar sets of options that have a small but important nuance between them. So what the device integration and upgrade packs have in common are that they are both optional purchases to increase the device and/or point limit of the base EC-Boss 8 core software. The difference between the two is that an integration pack must be purchased at the time of the initial purchase of the EC-Boss 8 and its core software, whereas the upgrade pack are purchased anytime after the initial purchase. Furthermore, the upgrade packs are 15 to 35% more expensive than their corresponding integration pack. So it's really important to try your best to estimate the number of controllers and points that you will be adding at the initial purchase and accommodate for any future upgrades in order to save some money on having to buy the upgrade packs in the future. But it at least gives you the ability to build out your system in a modular way as needed. Question number 5, is there a limit on how many device upgrade packs I can add to an EC-Boss 8? While there isn't a hard limit on the number of upgrade packs that can be added, so in terms of the license, you can continue to purchase upgrade packs and extend that device and point limit, users should still monitor CPU utilization, keep usage, and integration bus limits when adding device upgrades. So, so basically, there's no license limitation, but at some point you will have a hardware limitation just as you would for any embedded hardware device. Question number 6, is the EC-Boss 8 made in USA or ARRA compliant? No, the product is a made in Mexico product. If you need an EC-Boss that complies with a made in USA requirement, a current option is to purchase a made in USA EC-Boss 6 or contact Distech Controls to determine an alternate way to comply with the requirement. So there are alternate ways that we've experienced in the past for being accepted on made in USA type jobs. Question number 7, can an EC-Boss 8 be installed anywhere in the world? Every country has their own regulations for safety and wireless communication. So because there is a Wi-Fi component to the EC-Boss 8, the EC-Boss 8 has received certification for installation in many countries, but not all. So it's always important to refer to the EC-Boss 8 Global Shipping Guide to confirm which countries have approved either the EC-Boss 8 with Wi-Fi or without Wi-Fi, or only the EC-Boss 8 without Wi-Fi. This document is available on SmartSource, and below is an excerpt of that. Question number 8, does the EC-Boss 8 and ECNet 4 supervisor automatically include a software maintenance agreement at the time of purchase? Not exactly. So a separate purchase is required for an SMA, and it's a minimum of 18 months initial maintenance, or you can opt for a 3 or 5 year SMA instead. So it's not included with the purchase of that license. It's a separate line item that you need to order. Question number 9, is maintenance mandatory? Will this be a mandatory recurring cost for customers? So the way a software maintenance agreement works is that it must be purchased alongside an initial purchase of ECNet 4 Supervisor or EC-Boss 8. Like previously mentioned, a minimum 18-month SMA must be purchased, or an optional 3 or 5 year SMA can be purchased instead. You can choose whether or not you want to extend or renew the SMA by purchasing an additional 1, 3, or 5 year SMA before or after the initial maintenance period expires. So the graph below shows 3 different scenarios. So starting with the scenario at the bottom, you have someone that had purchased an initial 18-month SMA. So at the 3-year mark, so at this point the SMA had already expired for 18 months and had not been renewed. At that point, the customer decides that they want to purchase an additional 3-year SMA. So that 3-year SMA will not start from that 3-year mark, but it will first go back to cover the 18 months that was not previously covered by an SMA. And so from that 3-year point onwards, you have 18 months remaining on that 3-year SMA. The second example is showing when you had purchased an initial 3-year SMA. So if you purchase an additional 3-year SMA at that point, then you have those full 3 years. And the example at the top is a 5-year SMA was purchased. At the 3-year point, there's still 2 years remaining on that SMA. If somebody purchases a 3-year SMA at that point, it will be tagged on at the end. So at that point forward, you will have 3 plus 2 years on your SMA remaining. Question number 10. What happens to my SMA if I add device packs to my ECBOS 8 or Niagara connections to my supervisor? So the software maintenance agreement, it works as follows. We had already gone through the 18-month, 3 and 5-year SMA for a supervisor or for an ECBOS 8. So within an SMA period, your license is upgraded automatically to the latest release version of ECNet. If during the course of an SMA period, you increase the point limit of an ECBOS 8 such that it surpasses the next threshold, so you go from the 500 point limit to the 1,250 point limit, or you add ECBOS connections to your supervisor, so you go from, for example, a SUP 3 to a SUP 10, then you continue with your existing SMA. There's nothing new to purchase. There's nothing that will be interrupted until it expires. And the next time you purchase an SMA, you need to purchase the one that will correspond with your new effective limits. So again, we have an example below. At year 0, the initial purchase was for a supervisor 3 with an 18-month SMA. At year 1, so after 1 year it expired, it's still covered under SMA. But 2 Niagara connection adders were added on, so you effectively have a supervisor 5. It still remains on that SMA. There's no additional purchase that needs to be made to extend that SMA or to keep it valid. And we now move on to year 2. At year 2, you decide to order an additional year of SMA. So you had passed 18 months, so 6 months of that 1 year will go back to cover the portion that was not already covered, and 6 months will flow forward. Finally, year 3, you added 5 more Niagara connection adders. At this point, your SMA is expired. So if you want to extend your SMA at this point, since it's expired, you would need to purchase an SMA equivalent to a SUP 10. So the SUP 10 SMA, because effectively your supervisor is now a supervisor 10. Question number 11. Does an ECNet 4 Pro connection to a supervisor count as one of the supervisor's Niagara connections? So this is just someone, a technician, for example, connecting their laptop that's running a version of ECNet 4 Pro and connecting to the supervisor. Does that mean that the supervisor needs to have a Niagara connection license for it? So the answer is no, because the only connections within a supervisor's Niagara network are counted against its licensed Niagara connection limits. So if you have a SUP 0, you have no Niagara connections, you'll still be able to connect to that with a laptop because you're not using the Niagara network to connect to the supervisor, but it's simply a platform or station connection or Fox connection. Question number 12. Can you have different versions of Distech support packs installed on different ECBOS JACE units and a supervisor within one Niagara system? So this is a scenario where you have a supervisor and you have ECBOSes underneath it, and you have Distech support packs, so you have Distech controllers connected to both the ECBOSes and or the supervisor as well. The question is whether you need the Distech control support pack to be at corresponding versions, or can they be at different versions? So the answer is yes, they can be at different versions. So the support pack only interacts with the host platform, not any other platforms within the system. So the support pack should just correspond with the version of ECNet installed on the same platform. So if there's a requirement for Ethernet 4.2 to be working with, or for an Ethernet 4.4 support pack, let's say, to work with in a version of Ethernet that's 4.2, then you just need to be concerned with that version of Ethernet that's running on that ECBOS 8 or that supervisor. You don't care about the version running on other ECBOSes in the system. So for example, if you update your supervisor with 4.3, then you should install the latest 4.4 support pack as well. But if you keep the ECBOS underneath the supervisor at 4.2, then you don't need to update the support packs on those ECBOS units necessarily. You have the option to upgrade them or not. Question number 13, can I use the Distech control support pack on an ECBOS 8 or supervisor from another vendor that has a brand, i.e. that has a brand ID other than Distech? So if you're running Ethernet 4 and your Niagara license file has a brand ID other than Distech or Distech EU, you will require a license to enable the wizard service, rest service, and radius service that are distributed via the Distech control support pack. So if you look at the diagram below, this is kind of the flow that you need to ask yourself. So first, is the station running on Ethernet 4? If the answer is no, then you don't need a support pack. If the answer is yes, then the next question to ask is that station licensed with a brand ID other than Distech? If it is a Distech supervisor or a Distech ECBOS, then again, you don't need the support pack. If it is not, then you require a support pack license, and you need to order that through Distech Control's customer service. Question number 14. Do you need a Distech support pack and license, if non-Distech brand, installed in the supervisor, even if the only Distech controllers in the system are installed under ECBOSes or JACEs, and not directly to the supervisor? So you have a supervisor, you don't have any Eclipse controllers, for example, directly connected to that supervisor. You only have ECBOS connections, and the only Distech controllers are under those ECBOSes. So the question is asking whether you need the support pack and a license for the support pack in the supervisor. Obviously, you will need it in the ECBOSes. So the answer is yes. You need the support pack installed, but you don't need the license for it, even if it is a non-Distech brand. So the support pack on the supervisor is needed to map points from Distech controllers installed under ECBOS units or support pack licensed JACEs. So this is a very important thing to note. There's a bit of a nuance there that you do need the support pack installed, but you don't need it to be licensed, even if it's the only case where you need a license is if it's a non-Distech supervisor. So so bear that in mind for your installations. Question number 15. If we have an ECBOS AX with IO16 and or IO34 modules connected to it, and we migrate the station to Ethernet 4 from Ethernet AX, are the IO modules still compatible and functional? Simple answer is yes. You have nothing to worry about. The ND-IO network will still remain and will be converted over to the Ethernet 4 station format. Question number 16. What are the steps for migrating an Ethernet AX station to Ethernet 4? So there's a bit of a process here, but thankfully the actual migration process is fairly simple and straightforward and fairly quick as well, all depending on the complexity of your system. So the first step is to, prior to making any purchases, prior to planning any new jobs or projects, the first thing to do is to assess and prepare for migration. So you need to evaluate the hardware for available disk space, heap size, and history RAM disk size. Review the modules to determine if there are Ethernet 4 equivalent versions available, and check for any custom program objects. So an important tool for this is there is an AX to N4 migration guide, which details this assessment process that you would need to go through prior to purchasing any upgrades or making any software changes. So the next step, once your assessment is good and you can see that your platform, your ECBOS 3, 6, or 7 AX or your supervisor is able to be migrated, then you need to first upgrade your AX stations to version 3.8 U1, so that's 3.8111. So you would need to purchase an upgrade part to get that 3.8 license, and that upgrade part will also give you the latest Ethernet 4 license as well. You would then need to back up your Ethernet AX station and transition databases to Ethernet 4 using the conversion tools. So this again is a software process detailed in the migration guide. And you then need to transition your Ethernet AX supervisor to Ethernet 4 if applicable. So if you have a supervisor in place, the first step in any upgrade or any migration is you need to upgrade or migrate your supervisor first prior to the EC bosses. You can then transition your EC boss AX units to Ethernet 4 and install the Ethernet 4 stations. And finally, just do a system check and cleanup to make sure that everything is still communicating as it was when running AX. Question number 17. What are best practices for migrating from Ethernet AX to Ethernet 4? So first off, you first need to determine if you even need to migrate a particular station host platform to Ethernet 4. So I'm talking about EC bosses or supervisors, but for the most part, I'm talking about EC bosses. So for example, if you have a supervisor on site that is serving as the main platform that the user is interacting with for viewing his graphics, alarms, histories, etc., then you're better served by migrating only the supervisor station and leaving the EC boss stations running the latest versions of either Ethernet AX 3.6, 3.7, or 3.8, all of which can communicate back to an Ethernet 4 supervisor. So basically, if the end user's only point of contact with the Ethernet system is through the supervisor and he's not going to access those EC bosses directly, then there may not be any benefit in migrating each one of those EC bosses, and you're maybe better off just migrating the Ethernet 4, migrating the supervisor to Ethernet 4. Secondly, make sure to do a proper assessment before using the AX to do a proper assessment using the AX to N4 migration guide prior to ordering any upgrades in order to determine if your host station is a good candidate for migration. So, so prior to purchasing any upgrades for your EC bosses, make sure that they're even good candidates for migration, or if it even makes sense to migrate them if you have a supervisor on site. Question number 18. I want to upgrade my existing small, medium, or large building supervisor. What do I need to purchase? So you will need to purchase a 1, 3, or 5-year SMA of a supervisor model equivalent to the old supervisor models. So the equivalency works like this. The old models were broken down as small building supervisor, medium building supervisor, and large building supervisor. So those equate to a SUP 3, a SUP 100, and a SUP UNL. So remember that the device model remains unchanged. So even though you purchase the upgrade and you convert your supervisor over to Ethernet 4 and it's now running Ethernet 4, the device model doesn't change. So it's still based on drivers and not device and point limits. So in this scenario, if you did not already have a BACnet driver on that supervisor and you want to add BACnet controllers now, even if it's running Ethernet 4, you would still have to go back and purchase the BACnet driver. It's not included, but you will not need to determine the number of controllers and points that you'll be adding to the supervisor because there are no limits on devices and points. Question number 19. I have an existing small, medium, large building supervisor based on the older driver-based licensing model, and I want to expand upon it, i.e. I want to add more devices or points to it, or add more EC boss connections, etc. Am I better off keeping that supervisor license as is and adding options to it, or purchasing a whole new supervisor license with a newer capacity-based model? So short answer is it depends. So I've seen scenarios where it makes more sense cost-wise to keep the old supervisor and continue to add drivers or point packs to it. And I've seen the opposite as well, where it makes more sense to just buy a whole new supervisor and start from scratch using the device and point limit model, just because it's, again, more cost effective. So it all, in the end, depends on the number of ECBOS connections you plan on adding, and the number of controllers and points you'll be planning on adding now and in the future, because at one point there will be a break even that you need to consider. Question number 20. How do I get an ECBOS 8 to run on AX 3.8111? So step one is you need to purchase an option to allow AX to run on that ECBOS 8. Out of the box, an ECBOS 8 is licensed for Ethernet 4, and you can only connect to it using Ethernet 4, not Ethernet AX. Step two is you need to, using Ethernet 4 Pro, load the N4 to AX conversion dist file using the distribution file installer. And step three is now that ECBOS 8 is able to run on AX, you connect using Ethernet AX 3.8111 or higher and open the connection to the ECBOS 8. And from that point onwards, you'll be connecting to it using Ethernet AX and not Ethernet 4. Question number 21. How will using the ECBOS 8 in Ethernet AX be licensed? By devices or resources? So this is a scenario where you're running AX on this ECBOS 8. What device model is it going to follow? Vice versa, will my ECBOS AX, for example, a 3 or a 6, have device point limits if upgraded to Ethernet 4? So the ECBOS 8 is initially licensed for Ethernet 4. An option can be purchased to allow the ECBOS 8 to be licensed for Ethernet AX, which we just saw in the previous example. But similar to Ethernet 4, the ECBOS 8 will still be licensed by points and devices, not by drivers. Similarly, or vice versa, the ECBOS AX units are initially licensed for Ethernet AX. A 1, 3, or 5-year SMA can be purchased to upgrade those licenses to the latest version of AX and to provide for the latest version of the Ethernet 4 license. However, the units will keep the same licensing model as they had before, driver separate and no device limit. Question number 22. If I have 200 devices on a Vicon Jace, but only 100 of them are Distech controllers, so this is a non-Distech brand of Jace of ECBOS, would I need to purchase the support pack license to match the ECBOS 8 core software license of 200, or just the 100 device support pack license? So this is a scenario, you have 200 devices total, only 100 of those 200 devices are Distech controllers. What do I need to purchase? So they'll need to purchase the appropriate core or device pack for the total number of device controllers first, connected to it, including the Distech controllers. So this is like in the case of a new purchase, or in the case of an existing ECBOS 8 where you're adding controllers to it. So you first need to make sure that you have a sufficient device and point limit to accommodate for all controllers. And in addition to that, they will need to purchase the appropriate Ethernet support package device pack for only the number of Distech controllers connected to the station. So not for the 200 in this scenario, but only the 100 that are Distech controllers. So in the end, they would have to purchase these two parts for this example. Question number 23. Can I order an ECBOS 8 software core from Distech for a non-Distech ECBOS 8? Simple answer is no. You need to go to whichever vendor you purchased that ECBOS or that Jace from, because Distech cannot license cores for non-Distech ECBOS 8s or non-Distech ECBOSs in general. Question number 24. Do you have any documentation or guidelines for IT security that I can provide to IT people? Yes, the Station Security Guide provides all information that will be pertinent to an IT network administrator in regards to IT network security. So it covers topics such as secure communication, user authentication, and authorization management. And finally, question number 25. I heard that tunneling functionality has been removed from ECNet 4. What impact does that have on station and controller access? So that is correct. In AX, you were able to tunnel from one available IP address of, say, a supervisor down to an EC boss and launch a wizard or ECGFX program that way without a direct connection to that EC boss. That was not technically a very secure way of accessing your system. So tunneling was removed in ECNet 4, and you can no longer do that same kind of action. The preferred way, then and now, of securing a system is by accessing it through a VPN. If there is a VPN, then once you access the VPN, you can then navigate to the IP address of any EC box in your system and launch a wizard or ECGFX program without any issue.